So, in my last video, I showed off the new smallest 3x3 door and all the history behind it, and you guys absolutely loved it. Lots of you were saying it was my highest quality video ever, which I'm really glad about, because that video took 2 months to make. But some of you weren't happy with the ending, because I didn't explain how this door works. I mean, you take one look at this thing, and you just think, what the heck am I looking at? Because there are multiple elephants in the room here. Why are there so many minecarts shoved in here? Why does a redstone door need villagers in it? You know, living, breathing things in a redstone contraption. Why is there a fireball down here? And not to mention a bloody ender dragon fireball up here. And also, why does this stuff keep showing up in all the smallest doors? Here I've got the smallest 2x2, all the way up to the smallest 6x6, and all of them are crammed full of minecarts and mobs and floating blocks. Have Redstoners gone mad? All of that will be explained in this video. Now I should warn you that the full answer is not so simple, which is why I didn't explain anything at the end of the original video. I felt like it would have just ruined the happy ending. And also, the explanation is fascinating and complex enough that it deserves its own video anyway. And to help me explain this madness, I'm joined by 3 of the 4 people who made this door. We've got Doormaker, Ganymede, and Sacred. They are way better at redstone than me, and I don't really understand most of what's happening here. So let's get ready to feel stupid together. So the most burning question that everyone had about this door is, what the hell is this dragon fireball doing?
Well, it's not a dragon fireball, it's actually 2 of them stacked on top of each other. And what it does is it powers this pressure plate when this top section gets pushed to the right, so that this piston right here will push it back. Yeah, so we can kind of see that happening right here. If I just slow the game down a bit, you can see Dragon Fireball hits that pressure plate, these pistons push out, and then this piston pushes back. And the reason there are 2 is that the first one will activate this pressure plate, and half a second later, the second one will update it, and that sends an update to the piston to push it back. Also, it powers these pistons down here for the double piston extender. And then, other than that dragon fireball, there's also another fireball over here, but a small one. What's this one doing? So this fireball is a bit simpler. Basically, when this piston that has the pressure plate on it pulls back, the fireball will barely clip the pressure plate, and since it does it so fast, it makes this one in front pulse. We've actually got a setup for it over here, so you can kind of see it more clearly. Over here, we just got double extender, and then you push this piston out. The piston arm pushes that little fireball, and then it also pulls it back. And when it does, it just barely hits that pressure plate, and then makes this piston pull that block back. So it's kind of like this. And then, so how do you get these fireballs to be frozen like this? That doesn't seem like it would be possible in a normal survival world, right? It actually is possible. So the simpler one is the small fireball, because you can shoot them from a dispenser. What you can do is time it with like the pushing of a piston, as well as some sort of block that alters the way it moves, like a cobweb. So when I push this button, it'll pause that fireball in place, and then it gets pulled back by the piston. And it's just frozen there, and we can just do whatever you want with it. You can like move it around with pistons after that, like we did there. That's right. And it won't blow up or anything. They would cause fire if they had momentum, but it's basically frozen, and when you push it, it's not really giving it any momentum, so it will not catch anything on fire. Literally all it does is just interact with pressure plates. Now, a dragon fireball is a bit more complicated. It's the same idea, but of course you have to get it from the ender dragon. Yeah, because a lot of people were saying, oh, this door is not possible in survival, it's not legit. Yeah, so it is possible. You have to start in the end, and basically the easiest way to do this, you can find it from Doormaker, where you set up a wall of pistons and cobwebs like this, and when the dragon shoots a fireball, it'll get caught in the same way. So from that, since you're in the end, you can push it towards the end fountain through the portal and bring it to your door. So it's a bit more tedious, but it is possible. Yeah, you've got to go a long way to fetch this from the end, just for a door. But wait a minute, since you can do this with both small fireballs and dragon fireballs, then why do you need the dragon fireball at all? Can't we just do it all with small fireballs? Why do we need this? Well, if you hit F3B, you'll see that the small fireball is small and the dragon fireball is much larger. For the small fireball, it's the easier one, so we could just use it for this double piston extender. But But on the other one, we need something that's tall enough to hit a pressure plate at the bottom of the block and the piston above it. So it needs to be 1 block tall, like this dragon fireball. There's also a gassed fireball, which is a bit easier to get than a dragon fireball, but because you can punch them back, it has like a huge radius around it where you can't really interact with stuff properly, and it's just not really viable.
Oh yeah, I guess you could accidentally punch it several times while building it and just blowing things up.
Yeah, wouldn't really want that in a door.
So that's the first burning question answered. They use glitched frozen fireballs that get pushed by pistons to trigger pressure plates, so that when one piston movement finishes, the next one happens automatically, while only using 1 block of space taken up by the pressure plate. So that kind of covers the fireballs. What about these villagers? Like, what are they doing? Like, why do we need mobs indoors?
There are actually 2 villagers that you could see right here. So these villagers are not really powering anything themselves. When you press F3B, you'll notice that they're at slightly different positions.
Yeah, there's like a little L shape.
Yeah. The top villager acts like a wall for this minecart to stop it from going too far right, and the more downwards villager acts like a sort of floor on the closing so that the minecart can land on top of it. And that makes it all so that this detector rail inside of the villagers will only be activated by that minecart on the opening sequence.
So basically, it's like a toggle for this rail, so the minecart doesn't trigger that rail, and then the second time round it does.
Pretty much, yeah.
And so the sole purpose of these villagers is just to have a minecart resting on top of their heads.
That's pretty much all they do, yeah.
And there's the second question answered. Just like with fireballs, they use mobs with very specific hitboxes to trigger pressure plates. But in this door, instead of triggering pressure plates, they use their hitboxes to rest the minecart on their heads. So that explains what the villagers are doing, but another thing I'm wondering is how do these villagers just stay in place like that without the minecarts just rolling off somewhere?
Yeah, so these 2 villagers are in a NAN minecart, which stands for not a number, and you'll see what that means in a bit. So basically, everybody knows when you have a bunch of minecarts on the same rail and you push it, it's just going to fly off. And that's because all those collisions with each other make their velocities skyrocket, like really high. And you can use that principle of having a bunch of minecarts colliding with each other, making their velocities go crazy on these sloped rails in a setup like this. And they will build up so high that it overflows, and Minecraft just stores it as infinity. And you can actually do it in both directions, so you get positive and negative infinity. And when you let them collide, it's like adding positive and negative infinity, and the game just doesn't know what's happening when you do that, so it kind of errors and just sets its motion to not a number, and that breaks all of its physics, really. You see me jumping on this right here, it's not pushing. If I break the block, it doesn't fall.
Yeah, it's just completely frozen because we've basically glitched the heck out of its momentum.
The only thing you could do to move it, really, is with pistons. And in fact, they're so broken that if you take more minecarts and you run it into it, because it's just doing like a normal number times not a number, those ones also break.
So it's like a zombie minecart. This one infects other minecarts that touch it, basically.
Yes, except for certain circumstances, but yeah, that's basically how it works. So there are 4 not a number minecarts, and they're in 2 pairs. So the first pair holds these 2 villagers, and it does 2 things. 1, it stops the villagers from being able to push them around like a normal minecart, and 2, it holds them at the specific Y values that we just saw that make it work. And then the other pair is inside this block right next to the villagers, and you can see the proximity to the villagers. If it was a normal minecart, it would get pushed out of the door, so that's why they need to be not a number.
Yeah, so this is like the only way to get these minecarts to sit this close to the villagers without them being pushed away.
Yeah.
And that's the third part of the question answered. They use glitched floating minecarts known as NAN carts. They can't be moved by anything except for pistons, so they can use these to glue things in place, because if some of these things were allowed to move, then the door would break. So we know what this minecart does, but what did the rest of the minecarts in the top row do?
Funnily enough, they only do one thing, and that is to keep that minecart from going too far left. Because if it goes too far left, it'll just fall out of the door. And the way it does that that is by having a minecart outside of where the piston is pushing all the minecarts, and you kind of just connect it with a row of minecarts so they all run into each other and keep each other in the same spot. So without all the minecarts at the top, what happens is it pushes too far to the left because it kind of gets stuck between the piston and the cyan wool. So it looks fine on the closing, but when you try again on the opening, things kind of go wrong.
Yeah, it's kind of fallen into the door.
You can see the door looks a bit unopened.
Yeah, just a little bit. Oh, it's kind of closed, actually. There's one block stuck over here. But yeah, that's not opening anymore. So the sole purpose of these minecarts is literally just to stop this minecart moving too far to the left and falling out the door. That's all they do.
Yep.
Okay, and so what do the rest of these minecarts do? Because there's still 5 left that we haven't really accounted for.
Just like the top row, these minecarts are really only supporting one minecart as well, except it's this one. So you can see that it's resting on this quartz block, and that quartz block gets pushed by the pistons. So when we close it, we see that there's nothing that it's resting on during the closing, except for that minecart. So without it, it'll just fall through and those other minecarts will become dislodged and everything will break just the same way we saw.
So yeah, this minecart is resting on top of this one, which is resting on top of this one, and this one, and this one, and this one.
So if we remove all those support minecarts, you'll see that one right there just fall through the door, and the entire top row will become dislodged. Obviously, it works the first time, but you just see that one fall. So we activate it again, and, you know, kind of the same story. If you delete the top row, it breaks on the opening.
Yeah, now we've just lost more and more minecarts.
I'm very surprised it didn't break that time, but now it'll break.
Yeah, now we've got a minecart in the door, and it's just not doing anything anymore. So yeah, as silly as it looks, all those minecarts are actually very important. Even though they only do one job, it's a very important job. And that's the 4th question answered. Just like the glitched minecarts from earlier, these minecarts are also there to hold stuff in place. The top row stops this minecart moving too far to the left, and this stack of minecarts props this one up, because when the door's closed, there's no block there to support it, so it would fall out. So basically, the takeaway from this is that the purpose of these 5 minecarts, these 7 minecarts here, these 2 floating nan minecarts here, this minecart here, and these villagers, the purpose of all of them is literally to just make it so that this detector rail only powers in the opening, right?
Yep.
So all of those entities are literally just one giant T flip-flop. Literally, all they are doing, for those of you who don't know what a T flip-flop is, it's just that. They are just toggling something on and off.
Pretty much.
That's crazy. But then again, when you have this little space, you kind of have to think outside the box to make this kind of stuff happen. And then I think all that's really left to explain is the actual piston layout itself. I touched upon some of this in the video, but it was very, very dumbed down, very simplified, because I wanted to keep the video as short as possible. It was already 27 minutes long. So, Sacred, you care to explain some stuff about the piston layout?
Yeah, sure. So as mentioned in the video, this layout here that we ended up using is not the first one that people tried previously. This is, I believe, one of the earlier ones people tried. And if this was possible to wire, this would end up being 54 blocks, which is 2 blocks smaller than the previous record. Now, the main problem with this one is the complexity of this side here. There's not really any room to wire that.
Yeah, like how the hell do you even get down here? Because this piston here is blocking access to these 4 usable blocks of air.
Yeah, exactly. And not to mention that the sequence itself is not the easiest. So if I run it through for you here, this side starts by doing this, 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 this. And then your top pistons are pretty simple, and then the double extender does this. And this is basically your closing.
I noticed that you pulsed this normal piston even though it wasn't doing anything on the closing. Why is that?
That is because if you were to wire this, you would probably want to wire in such a way that the sequence is exactly the same between the closing and the opening.
You're basically reusing the same thing for the opening and closing, which allows you to make it smaller because it uses less redstone.
Exactly. And then if I run through the opening here, we'll start by pushing this. And here I would power these pistons, but because they're blocked by the left side, they're not going to do anything. So then it would basically be this, And then here's this move from earlier that pushes the block up so that that piston can retract it. And then the last move is this will retract the blocks. And then while all of that is going on, the rest of the pistons are free to retract.
And I also noticed that not only are these 4 blocks kind of unusable, but also there's 3 blocks of air here, but you really can't do anything with these. It's just unusable space. It is space, but how the hell are you going to do anything with it? It's kind of just a flaw with this layout, I guess.
Yeah, and another thing as well, Ganya already had a working setup for this whole double extender that fit entirely within this top corner here. This corner was already solved, which meant that this bottom volume was completely useless.
So it was just purely wasted space. Like if you could somehow just take these 3 blocks of air and give them to this side of the door, then that's what you would want, really. That would make it so much easier to do.
Right, and that is sort of what people try to do with this layout here. So with this one, we cut off the bottom entirely, and then we kind of reallocate that volume to the sides.
Yeah, so this one has a floor, and then this one has no floor. There's nothing underneath here.
Exactly, and we've added additional layers on the sides, and this works out to be 55 blocks, so 1 block bigger than this one, but still 1 block smaller than the world record. Now, the way this one works is a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, it looks more complicated.
Yeah, this one actually has a triple extender on the right side. Not the easiest thing to wire in this very little space you have here.
Yeah, would you wire a triple piston extender in this space? That doesn't really seem possible. You've got to somehow power this piston when it's here. Like, how do you get power to that piston?
So the way you would wire this triple here is using this observer right here. So when this block is pushed down, you can actually move in this observer to power the piston when it's at this position here.
Oh.
Right. And this could also be used to power the double extender at the same time as well. Now, doing that would require some precise timings, which would also be pretty tricky to fit in this situation. But then you still have to worry about actually retracting all of this. Quite the complicated sequence.
Yeah, I don't see that happening.
The way this layout works, for the middle row, you just start by extending that block, and then you do this. And then the bottom row, just use this. And then these blocks are filled in by these 2 pistons. And then for the opening, you have to extend this, all of these, retract this, like so. And then for the middle row, you store this block and retract this one.
So basically, this layout over here, it's got the advantage that it requires far fewer moves, but it's got the disadvantage that a lot of the empty space in it is just in the wrong place. It's not very accessible. But this one, the space is a lot more accessible, but the piston sequence just has so many moves that you're not going to be able to fit it into that space.
Exactly. Which sort of brings us to this new layout here that we ended up using. This one we felt was special because of a couple of reasons. So we were back to 2 double extenders on this side here, and unfortunately some of the volume had to be used by this slider. However, this side was the really special one because most of the free volume is in this area, and more importantly, the sequence is exactly the same between opening and closing. It is far simpler to wire than the triple extender on the previous layout. So the way this one works here is on the closing, we start by pushing this slider and retracting this piston. Then we extend this piston as well as this double extender, which pushes these blocks forward. And then afterwards, this slider gets pushed back. This piston powers twice in the middle. And then lastly, we extend these pistons like so. And then finally, for this side, this piston pushes this row of blocks, and this piston is pushed down and then extends to push that in. And the sequence on the opening is very similar. So by pushing the slider, this piston goes up. These pistons extend now using the funny minecart that we've been talking about.
Yeah, that's where the minecart and the villagers go. It's for these pistons here.
Yeah, and that's basically the only thing that are different between the opening and closing is the double extender here extending.
That's what I was referring to earlier when I said that all those minecarts were literally just that, is these piston movements here only happen in the opening.
Yes. Now we retract this block here and then extend the double extender to pull this block back here behind the piston. This double extender is free to retract, and we move the slider back at the same time. Once again, that powers twice. And then the last moves are power this to retract the block, and then extend this to grab that last block.
So I noticed that this one also has a lot of moves, but they're evenly distributed throughout the door. Yeah. So every bit of space is sort of like sharing the load evenly.
Yes, it's a much more balanced layout.
Yeah, with this door over here, you've got a ton of moves in this corner of the door and just not enough space to do it. But over here, it's a well-balanced layout. There's not too many moves in one spot.
Exactly. When we came up with this layout, we both thought that if one of the layouts was going to be it, it's going to be this one, just because of how much more manageable it seemed to be, how much more balanced compared to the previous ones that were attempted.
Yeah, this was the most realistic attempt, basically. And that's the final piece of the puzzle. They needed a piston layout that has all of its empty space above the bottom pistons, and doesn't have anything in the middle splitting it up. So there was no unreachable space at the bottom that went to waste, and no space that got blocked off by a piston. And they also needed a layout with a sequence of moves that spreads everything fairly evenly throughout the door, unlike the previous layout where most of the piston movements happened on one side of the door, while the rest of it was barely doing anything at all. The redstone required to do all those moves would never fit, so these layouts weren't possible to wire. They only worked in theory, not in practice. So they wired as much of this layout as they could with conventional redstone, and then to fit everything else in, they used all these tricks with minecarts, fireballs, and villagers to cram more redstone circuits inside other redstone circuits. And that is why Redstoners shove entities indoors, to fit more redstone circuits into a small space when there is no space left. So if you've made it to the end of this very long and detailed explanation, hopefully that's answered all your questions. But if you've got any more, then obviously leave them in the comments. And a huge thanks to Doormaker, Ganymede, and Sacred for taking the time to help me prepare these demonstrations and explain everything.